Hi, I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, and I'm based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. So, I got the A7R Mark III, and after pausing on Sony for a while, I finally found a camera body that they produce that doesn't get in the way of getting the picture, at least for the way that I like to shoot. Now that I'm confident in the A7 line, it was time for me to start considering investing in more of the FE lenses. Now, I've already had the 35mm f1.4, which I love, and the 55mm f1.8. I shoot a lot of portraits, and I also shoot a ton of real estate, and I had a budget of about $600, making the choice obvious. I bought the 85mm f1.8, having read great things and having used and reviewed the 85mm f1.4 G Master. I didn't really want or need to spend $1,800 on a lens. And if you saw my f1.8 versus f1.4 lenses video, then I think you know why I chose the f1.8. So, how does it perform in real-world situations? Well, let's find out. So first up is build quality. And like the other FE lenses, the 85 f1.8 is built to a high standard, especially for something so relatively inexpensive. Well, inexpensive at least by Sony standards. The barrel is made out of metal, and it has a metal lens mount. Coming in at just over 13 ounces, the 85 is relatively light, though it's heavier than most other 85mm f1.8 offerings from other manufacturers like Canon and Nikon. But just the same, it's still easy to manage for an all-day shoot. The focus ring is thick and ribbed and easy to manipulate, but as with other Sony lenses, there's no physical connection between the focus ring and the elements on the inside of the lens, as the focus mechanism is fly-by-wire. Which means that one annoyance about this thing is that the faster you rotate the ring, the faster the lens responds to your input, meaning it's really not a precise way to manually focus, as there's no distance meter to rely on for accurate manual focus pulls. Now, this could be a problem for some videographers. Now, back to the ring itself, it offers a fair amount of resistance, but it's really fluid. On the inside, there are 9 elements arranged in 8 groups, and included in that formula is 1 extra low dispersion element. There are also 9 rounded aperture blades, which should make for some smooth and pleasing autofocus bokeh rendering, but we'll get into that in more detail in the optical quality and quality of results section. Now, speaking of the aperture, it ranges from f1.8 all the way to f22, and the front filter thread is a particularly common 67mm. Finally, the 85 does in fact have a dust and moisture resistant design. Though I really can't find much in the way of faults with the build, and even though the lens barrel is in fact made out of metal, truthfully it's not the highest quality of metal available, but it's still built to a very high standard, and as such, the FE 85 f1.8 gets a 9.5 out of 10 for build quality. So next up is autofocus speed and accuracy. The 85 is outfitted with Sony's double linear AF motor, meaning that AF speed is fast, decisive, and very accurate, especially on the 3rd generation of A7 camera bodies. Now, I've used this lens on the A7 Mark II and the A7R Mark III, and the AF speed and accuracy is noticeably faster on the latest camera bodies. Now, couple that with the IAF, and I find the 85 to be stunningly accurate. If you happen to be a video shooter, AF tracking with the 85 f1.8 and the A7R Mark III work exceptionally well together. Now, fast as it may be, it's still not quite up to Canon ultrasonic or Nikon AFS motor speeds, but in reality, it's more than adequate and fast enough for most real-world situations. And more often than not, a lens like this is going to be used in a static portrait session, so it's likely your subject will be still, and if that's the case, whether the focus is lightning fast or not, it really isn't a deal breaker. Now that said, I've used the 85 in action situations too, and so long as my shutter speed was fast enough to freeze the action, I was very pleasantly surprised at how well the 85 caught fast-moving action. So in the end, it's adequately fast and very accurate on the latest Sony camera bodies, though still not quite up to the latest ultrasonic or AFS motors from Canon and Nikon, meaning that the Sony gets a 9.5 out of 10 for autofocus speed and accuracy. Next up is the moment of truth. How are the optics? In a word, I think they're brilliant, with some important caveats. I've used the Sony 85mm f1.4 G Master, and I was impressed with its optics, especially its 11-blade aperture and how it made the bokeh rendering just breathtakingly beautiful. And truthfully, I really didn't see a huge difference between these two lenses optically, at least not so much that a client would likely notice the difference. And again, you can check out my f1.8 versus my f1.4 lens video in the description below. Now, center performance is incredibly sharp, and chromatic aberrations are very, very well controlled. They do show up in the autofocus background areas as green fringing, but they're a simple click away from fixing in Lightroom. Now, speaking of the autofocus backgrounds, we do get some cat's eye bokeh in the background, but for me, that's really never something that's been a huge deal. Vignetting, though present, especially at f1.8, isn't something that really concerns me either. In fact, sometimes I kind of like some vignetting. And if I don't like it, or if I don't want it in an image, it's a simple click or fix with the lens profile corrections, again, in Lightroom. However, there is one thing with the Sony 85 f1.8 that really doesn't sit all that well with me. Now, I can't tell if it's the lens or the color science of the A7R Mark III, because as sharp as the optics of this lens are, and they are, frankly, I'm a bit underwhelmed with the color and the bokeh rendering that I'm getting from the A7R Mark III and the 85 f1.8. Now, I've reached out to a couple other big Sony users on YouTube to see if they changed their color profile or were using some other color setting outside of the factory default. And much to my surprise, they weren't, because based on my experience, I'm a bit underwhelmed by the performance. I mean, color's okay, I guess, but it feels kind of muted and really not all that vibrant to me. And bokeh, to my eye, kind of looks a little bit harsh. The bottom line is the Sony 85mm f1.8 is in fact a very great optic, but I'm simply not in love with the color science of the Sony camera bodies, nor am I super in love with the bokeh rendering of the 85 f1.8. Now that said, don't take my word for it, see for yourself. The next 2 to 3 minutes will be a series of stills and video clips illustrating the optical performance of the Sony FE 85mm f1.8. And as sharp as the optics are, I may need to play with the color profile just a little bit more on the A7R Mark III.
Million thoughts are spinning around in my head. My pulse holds it down, 'cause I'm almost there. Now I see you through the window and I'm walking on it, but I won't let you know. And I know how it goes. It's supposed to feel incredible.
So last up is value. And what you have here is an 85mm f1.8 lens that's built really well and is optically pretty excellent. But it comes in at about a 20% premium if you compare it to its DSLR competition from both Canon and Nikon. However, the most obvious competitor is the Zeiss Batis 85mm f1.8. Now to me, the Sony is a slightly better lens, and given that it's about half the price, it's kind of a no-brainer if you're trying to decide between those two lenses, unless of course you prefer Zeiss as a brand, but really there isn't much differentiating these lenses optically, and again, it's certainly not the kind of stuff that your clients will likely notice. Now if you ask me, I'd likely get the f1.8 over the f1.4 G Master, even if I could afford the more expensive lens, because in my opinion, the FE85 f1.8 is a much better value overall, even though I believe the 85 G Master is in fact a better lens. It just isn't worth 3 times the price to me. So as a result, the 85 f1.8 gets a 9.5 out of 10 for value. So to wrap up this review, we gave the Sony FE 85mm f1.8 lens a 46.5 out of 50 and our highly recommended rating. The final word. If you're a portrait photographer who just recently made the switch to Sony, and if you need a nice 85mm lens, then I don't think you can go wrong with the Sony FE 85mm f1.8. It has great optics and decent build, and all for $599, which admittedly is a bit high when compared to legacy DSLR offerings of the same focal length and aperture. You also have to live with some so-so autofocus bokeh rendering, which I admit is pretty subjective stuff. But in the end, I think the 85mm f1.8 is in fact a relative bargain in the Sony mirrorless system. I'm Darren Miles with Darren Miles Photography, and I'm based here in beautiful, sunny Southwest Florida. The links to purchase the Sony 85 are down below in the description, and if you like videos like this, please give me a like, or better yet, subscribe. And until the next time, happy shooting.